Assalamu alaikum. Okay. So continuing our understanding of how things work in human body, we're today going to talk about cellular transport. Okay, and as I was telling the other group that in the beginning it's a little difficult to understand or make sense of things because they are like in chunks, some information here, some there. It's like the complete sense or complete understanding is when you have studied everything. Okay, for example, acid-base balance. Last time we studied acid-base balance because that is one of the examples for homeostasis. Okay, that's an example for homeostasis, how a living organism maintains pH. Okay, a stable internal environment. Now, if you open the book, it's very difficult to find acid-base balance. I don't know if you did open the book or not, because acid-base balance is in the kidney chapter. Okay, it's not in the first introduction or something like that. But we had to explain an example to understand what is homeostasis and how homeostasis is maintained. Now, we talked about so much about like how to say ions go inside, outside, osmosis, diffusions, maintaining temperature and things like that. But we did not have studied the cellular transport, mechanism of cellular transport. That's we are studying today. Then we often talk about sodium, potassium concentrations and nerve impulses and stuff, but the lecture on action potential is at the end of this term. Okay, so I know it's difficult. The thing is, I understand that it's a lot of new things for you, a lot of new words, a lot of new terminologies, and it's difficult to understand. Okay, but just bear with me, and towards the end, the more you study, the more it will look familiar and will make sense. Okay, at times it doesn't make sense. Okay, like some of the terms today that we are going to study might make sense with the coming lectures. Okay, but you can at least try to understand. Okay, and I'm here to explain as many times as you want. You can come into my office, you can send me emails. So I'm here to explain. I have kept it very, very simple because we are trying to understand the basics. They can be as much details as we want, but we are trying to keep it simple. So cellular transport is the individual, the unit of life is cell. You know that, right? For example, it's like different in other disciplines. It may be different. Cell might mean different thing when we talk about physics, but we're not talking about physics, we're talking about biology. So in biology, cell is a unit of life. Okay, cell is the smallest living thing that is possible. Okay, and how does that small cell, an electron microscope small cell, okay, that's visible with electron microscope, how does that particular unit of life maintains an environment, okay? How does it maintain life inside, okay? Because it's outside, inside is very different. And for that, you need to understand how things are transported inside the cell, how things are transported outside the cell, from inside to outside or outside to inside, and how things are refused entry into the cells, how things are kept inside the cell. For example, we talk about ATP, okay? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. We talk about everything. We talk about energy, we talked about anything, we say ATP, ATP, ATP. But ATP is inside the cell, it is synthesized inside the cell, okay, by the energy producing factories. But if you puncture a cell, if a cell dies and that ATP is released outside the cell, if it comes in contact from outside, it will be toxic for some of the cells, okay? So things which are inside the cell should remain inside the cell, things which are outside the cell, they should remain outside the cell, okay? And then there is a membrane between outside and inside that determines what things are going to go inside and what things are going to go outside, okay? It has doors on that membrane, doors like this door, okay? The door has a purpose. Door has a purpose. If you know everyone has to stay outside, we'll put a wall on it, okay? If everyone should freely come inside and go outside, then we'll just leave it empty. We don't need a door, okay? But we need some people to come inside and stay here, or we want the noises to stay outside and not be disturbing, so we put a door there, okay? There's no door on that side, okay, because we don't want people to go out from that side, okay? They will, fall down. So those doors on the cell membrane, there are plenty of types, and what we need to understand is what is the structure and function of cell membrane, and how does it happen that the cell maintains its life by allowing some things to come inside, allowing something to go outside, and then not allowing other things to come inside and go outside, okay? So for that, we need to first see what is the cell membrane. So this is a cell, for example, a cartoon of a cell, and then it's a cross section which is enlarged here, and this cell membrane has got a bimolecular lipid layer containing proteins and carbohydrates and stuff, okay? So it's a lipid bilayer. Bilayer means on both sides, on outside and on inside, there are lipid molecules, and then it has got lipid is hydrophobic, okay, and there is another portion which is hydrophilic, which is on the inside, okay? So cell membrane is a bilayer of hydrophobic molecules throughout around the cell, and cell is in a three-dimensional, it's like a balloon, okay? For example, like a balloon or a football or something which is more understandable as a three-dimensional thing. Here we have only two dimensions, so we always take cross sections and enlarge, but just try to imagine that it is all around the cell, okay? Like a football or like an egg or like a balloon or something like that. And then in that cell membrane, because if it's only lipid bilayer, it would be a very boring sort of thing. But inside it there are plenty of other molecules which are embedded in the cell membrane to perform certain functions, okay? The functions that make cell membrane the cell membrane or a functional unit. For example, there are proteins here that go through and through. They are outside and inside. They are called transmembranous proteins. Then there are filaments, cytoskeleton. Then with those proteins there are carbohydrate or sugar groups which are attached, or lipid groups which are attached, and they are called glycoproteins or glycolipids. And then there are cholesterol molecules and channel proteins and pores and lots of other stuff, okay? So all these structures, they perform functions for cell membrane, and they are necessary for cell membrane to perform its function as a barrier between. Now, what is the potential Function, it's a semi-permeable membrane. You like that animation, right? Okay. That was first time I did when I was defending my PhD thesis. Okay, so I had a very nice figure, and goes in the corner and text appears. So I thought I would do it again. Takes a bit of time. Okay. So cell membrane surrounds the cell membrane. It's fluid in nature. Now that's a tricky thing to imagine. Okay, like a football is a solid thing. Okay, a football, a balloon, even a balloon full of water. It's a solid thing. But cell membrane is a fluid thing. Okay, the cell is in the form of fluid. Yeah.
What is the difference between glycolipid and glycoprotein?
Glyco means carbohydrate. It's a carbohydrate attached to protein is a glycoprotein. Is attached to a lipid is a glycolipid.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So these all things, the cell membrane is a fluid in nature because cell is a very, very tiny thing, and it's not made up of like a hard like bones or something that makes it form. It's like a drop of water that will start flowing on any surface. So it's like a fluid in nature. Okay, it has got so many different proteins, and they have different functions. For example, those proteins are receptors, messengers, transport proteins, channels, carriers, and the sugar coating, the glycoprotein, which have sugar molecules attached. It's called sugar coating, just because sugar coating is a sort of word. So those receptors, these proteins, all of them have different functions. So for example, receptor proteins. Receptor proteins are, when you study pharmacology, they always talk about receptors. They say, okay, this drug molecule will go and find this beta receptor, this alpha receptor, so many of those receptors. And it's really difficult to memorize all of them. Even pharmacologists don't tell them, but it's very boring, okay? Don't tell them that I said it, but I found it so difficult, pharmacology. But those receptors are important because without receptors, the cell would not be able to recognize. Okay. Now, one molecule, if you have, for example, you're taking a medicine. Okay. How does that medicine work? That medicine goes, that breaks down into molecules. Molecules go to find specific cells, and on those cells they have receptors. Okay, so molecule goes to attach to that receptor and perform certain function that you want it to perform. Okay, for example, you're taking painkiller medication. A painkiller medication is going to decrease inflammation, and so how do they do? Those molecules go to find they go in the blood circulates in the whole body. So wherever they found those cells that have receptors for that molecule, it would attach and it start a chemical reaction that would decrease inflammation, and it would lead to decrease in your pain or headache or whatever you're feeling. Okay, so next is the messenger proteins. Messenger proteins is the one that works as a second messenger system. There are plenty of details about it, so many of it you don't need to memorize, but messenger is that a molecule comes or it attaches to protein takes that message of attaching that protein and starts a cascade of releases another mRNA, messenger ribonucleic acid, and that mRNA goes and starts another chemical reaction to perform a function, whatever that molecule was carrying as a message. Okay, then transport proteins that help transport things from outside to inside. Okay, because we said this layer is lipid on both sides. Okay, so anything which is soluble in lipids would readily go through. Okay, but anything which is not soluble in lipid, like water molecules, they're not soluble, so they need channels, they need proteins to help them go inside and come outside from the outside of the cell. So protein channels, they are also carriers. Proteins which carry one molecule inside, apart from they have certain receptors, and the more details are coming in the next slide. So proteins embedded inside the cell membrane perform all the functions that cell membrane has, okay, cell membrane has the function of mainly establishing a stable internal environment by transporting certain chemicals inside and outside, or not allowing certain chemicals inside and outside of the cell. So it's basically a boundary between extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. Okay. So apart from that, cells are closely joined to other cells, and cell membrane of one cell it also maintains an internal environment, but also maintains connections with other cells. Okay, those are different types of connections. Tight junctions, for example, you know that, for example, cardiac muscle cells. Okay, cardiac muscle cells, they contract as a unit. There are no one cell which is contracting and the other cells are not contracting. Okay, they contract as a unit. The whole cardiac bunch of cardiac muscles, they contract and they push the blood out into the circular system, and then they relax. Okay, all of them at the same time. If they're not doing it properly, then your blood function, your cardiac function is compromised. How do they contract together? All of them, they have tight junctions with other cells around. Okay, and that helps the electrical stimulus to organize or make it work as one single unit. Okay, there's a word used for this called syncytium, or a cell muscular unit that contracts as it consists of like hundreds or thousands of millions of cells, but it's working as one unit. Okay, how is it working at one? How it depolarizes and repolarizes at the same time? Because of the tight junctions and the gap junctions, communication junctions. Okay, so tight junctions, they help keep it in a muscular form. Okay, they help strengthen the cells together, and gap junctions, they help transport of chemicals from one place to other, one cell to the other. Okay, and there are also anchoring junctions, desmosomes, that join cells in a way that if, for example, cell is in a fluid form, it does not have any form, but an organ has a form. Okay, you have seen a kidney, for example, or a muscle of an animal, that, you know, the food or anything, any organ has a shape. Okay, organ has a shape. A cell does not have a shape, but an organ has a shape. Why does it shape? Because it is joined by other cells. Okay, those cells are joined together through different kind of junctions to make a visible or sustainable form that even in the time of stress, it maintains that form. Like cardiac muscles, they have to contract against a very high pressure. Okay, but still they maintain their form. They're not broken. So that's because they are joined by other cells. Now, along with that joining with the other cells and making junctions and making possible to perform a function along with other cells, so cell membrane has got a bunch of functions. Apart from the attachment to neighboring cells, they have the ability for receiving chemical and electrical signals. Chemical signals, as I said earlier, the molecule that's coming in the form of medication or drug or hormone or neurotransmitter or something, that molecule comes and attaches to a receptor and gives a message to the cell, and the cell receives that molecule and performs a certain function according to that message. Okay, so that is chemical signal. Electrical signal is different. We'll study when the action potential thing comes. But the action potential in the form of electricity that starts from brain, for example, and goes to your hand and you wave at someone or perform a function, that is the electrical signal. So a cell, a special form of cell, not every cell, which is capable of receiving electrical signals through a cell membrane. So apart from that, cell membrane, which is a semi-permeable membrane. Semi-permeable means it allows certain substances, but not all of them. Okay, and it's not impermeable, which does not allow anything. or permeable, which allows everything. Okay, so it's a semi-permeable or selectively permeable. It selects, it knows which things need to come and which things are toxic or which things should stay outside. So it maintains difference in composition of intercellular fluid and extracellular fluid in various organelles, protects cell from toxic substances. For example, if there are any toxic substances in the extracellular fluid, cell membrane would not allow them to come inside and injure the cell to a certain limit. Of course, if there's more toxicity or injurious substance, they can get inside, but as long as cell membrane can withhold, it will keep them away from the cell. Okay. Excretion of waste products and transport of nutrients. Now, the important function is that cell needs nutrients from outside, for example, glucose, for example, oxygen, for example, other stuff that needs that to maintain the cell in a state of life, and it needs to excrete waste products as a result of metabolism. There are chemicals produced which are no longer required, as a carbon dioxide, for example. Carbon dioxide inside the cell is produced as a result of metabolism, then it needs to be taken out. Okay, so cell membrane has all those functions. So why is it important? Why do we, need cell membrane to do all these functions? As I said earlier, that in order to for an action potential, okay, or in order for a cell to receive something, perform a function, it needs to maintain an ion gradient. Ion gradient means concentration of some ions inside the cell and outside the cell. The difference between inside the cell and outside the cell, it has to maintain. Okay, it has to keep ATP inside and the things which are outside. Okay, so it transports things across the cell membrane, and it regulates an ion balance inside and outside. Okay, next is the fluid balance. For example, there cannot be too much water inside and there cannot be too little water inside. So a body or a cell, for its continuity of living, has to maintain a fluid balance. If we drink too much fluid, okay, still our cells, we do not swell up like a sponge. Okay, or if we do not drink too much fluid, or we are going in a water, we are thirsty, or we are losing water in sweating or something, still the cells have the ability to maintain an internal environment as long as they can. Okay, they are not dying right away. Okay, they will maintain, they will either secrete less, make less urine, or vasodilatation or vasoconstriction and stuff like that. So one type of that movement is called osmosis. We'll see in the next slide. And then the nutrients and the waste management, because that's also essential. Now, where is actually cellular transport happens and how it is significant? In respiration, for example, oxygen goes into the cell, carbon dioxide is transported out. Then the nerve function, okay, the action potential, sodium, potassium, there are receptors that regulate that ion concentration for nerve signal transmission. We'll study in the action potential lecture. Muscle contraction, active transport of calcium ion is necessary for muscle contraction. So these are all things that membrane transport performs. And if there is impaired transport, if the cellular transport is not working properly, so there can be some consequences like electrolyte imbalance. For example, something happens and you have got potassium ion imbalance inside the cells. Okay, so potassium is something which is body is very, very sensitive, and there are some critical functions that depend on potassium, like the cardiac activity. Okay, heart muscles, they are very sensitive to potassium, and the ECG, the famous thing that everybody knows about ECG. So ECG has features. As soon as you have a higher concentration of potassium, which is called hyperkalemia, kalemia is the word for potassium, that's why it's written with a K. That's a very something, I don't know who put it like that. So if there is hyperkalemia or hypokalemia, low potassium or high potassium, the ECG or the electrical activity has changes, okay? And if there is a higher degree of variation, then the heart function is dysregulated and a person can die because of hyperkalemia or hypokalemia, okay? How does it happen? This is a subject for another discussion, but electrolyte imbalance, if there is not good cellular transport, or even seizures, okay? Inside the brain there can be fits or epilepsy like seizures. Dehydration, edema, if there is an imbalance or impaired transport function, so there would be too much water inside your cells and the cells are not maintaining their normal osmotic values, and too much fluid is retained inside the tissues and it leads to edema or dehydration. For example, they are not allowing fluid to come inside, or they are allowing too much fluid to come inside. And then dysfunctional transport mechanism also lead to some diseases like edema or electrolyte imbalance. It is treatable. You give, if patient has hypokalemia, you give them potassium, they will be all right, okay? If patient has dehydration, you give them water and they will be all right. But there are certain diseases which are like cystic fibrosis, which have genetically dysfunctional transport proteins, okay? So now, what kind of transports there are? Okay, there are plenty of transport, as we talked about. There can be different types of proteins. There can be different types of transport. Let's get into some kind of details to understand what do we know so far, or what can we know as a beginner of when we begin to understand the cellular function. So there are 4 types of transport: diffusion, osmosis, active transport, and vesicular transport, okay? Diffusion is the passive transport, okay? Passive means without the expense of energy, okay? Without the expense of energy, if there's a transport, it's going on, okay? It's going on, and so the energy is coming from the concentration of different atoms, okay? Like if there are too many sodium atoms or carbon dioxide atoms here in this room, for example, the atoms or molecules, they're always moving, okay? They cannot sit peacefully like you guys are sitting peacefully, or sleeping, whatever. Maybe there are people sleeping. The good thing about sleeping is that they're not even listening what I'm saying, okay? So let's not disturb them. So the organism can sit down peacefully, but their molecules are moving all the time, okay? It's a funny thing to say. So those molecules, they bump into each other, okay? And then that energy, if they're like, this room has the capacity for 500 molecules of carbon dioxide, and if we put like 2000 molecules, they will bump into each other, and they find a door and they go outside, okay? So their own energy, that concentration gradient, nobody needs more energy or ATP to spend on that and make that movement. So that's diffusion, passive transport. Active transport, that needs energy. Osmosis is movement of water, and vesicular transport is something else. So here on this slide, there are different types of diffusion, okay? First one is diffusion. So here in this slide we are showing different types of diffusion. For example, first of all, let's talk about the simplest thing, something which is lipid soluble, okay? A solute which is lipid soluble, it will shake hand with the lipid bilayer. Lipid bilayer will be so happy to take it inside because it dissolves automatically, okay? It's like you take 2 types of oils, olive oil and vegetable oil, you mix them, and they are like friends, they will mix up so well, okay? So anything which is lipid soluble, it will automatically go inside according to its own concentration gradient. If its concentration is high outside, it will go inside. If its concentration is high inside, it will diffuse outside, okay, without the expense of energy. But water molecules, for example, lipid and water are not friends. Okay, you take oil, you put a drop of water, it will stay there, it will not dissolve. Why? Because they are different. Okay, water molecules, they cannot dissolve into fats or cholesterol, or so they need some proteins, channel proteins. Okay, specific channel protein which is called aquaporin. Aqua is word for water, porin means a pore. Okay, so a transmembranous protein which is from outside to inside, so it takes water molecule inside without any expense of energy. It's still diffusion. Okay, so if water molecules are more outside, it will diffuse inside. If water molecules are more inside, they will diffuse outside, and they are doing it all the time. It's a dynamic process. Okay, it is the net movement of things. For example, 500 molecules are going inside, 300 going outside, so we will say that, okay, 200 molecules have moved. That's the net movement of molecules. Okay, then is the facilitated diffusion. Okay, facilitated diffusion is that like water, okay, there are small lipid insoluble solutes, small molecules. For them there are protein channels. Okay, these molecules, they are insoluble in lipid, so they need a molecule to help them to facilitate the diffusion. And then there is facilitated diffusion via protein carriers. They are specific for one chemical. Okay, these channels are common. Okay, common, they can be any lipid insoluble molecule that go knock at the door and the protein will say, please come inside. Okay, so they will take them inside. But for some molecules, there are special proteins that are specific for that molecule, and that will take them inside, and they will refuse all other molecules, even if they are there, to let them inside. So diffusion is the simple movement without any expenditure of energy because of the concentration gradient. Diffusion of water molecules, which needs proteins, aquaporins, because it's happening all the time. Water is everywhere, so we gave it a different name, although it is also a type of facilitated diffusion, but it's called osmosis. Okay, aquaporins, those proteins have a name, aquaporin. Then the facilitated transport generally through any channel proteins, and then facilitated diffusion through specific proteins. So that is diffusion. After diffusion, we have, okay, it's still diffusion, simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion. Just a little bit of more explanation. I think I found this more helpful to understand. So then is the active transport. Active transport means expending energy, okay, at the expense of ATP. ATP is energy currency, everybody knows. So something for which we need to spend energy to move. Now, sodium and potassium and water and everything, it is already moving, it is diffusing. Okay, so if it is diffusing already, why do we need to spend energy? We need to spend energy to go against the concentration gradient. Okay, concentration gradient means something is more in concentration on one side, it will automatically go to the other side. Okay, like more carbon dioxide here, it will diffuse outside. More oxygen outside, it will diffuse inside. It's called concentration gradient. You don't need energy for that. But if you need to go against the concentration gradient, okay, then you need to spend energy. For example, you need, like concentration gradient is a potential gradient. A potential gradient means something here has potential energy. Okay, if I leave it here, it will fall down due to potential energy, gravity. But if I don't need any energy to make it fall down. But if I have to bring it up back against that potential gradient, I need to spend energy. Okay, so similarly, if you have a molecule which is going with the concentration gradient, you don't need any energy. It is, it has its own kinetic energy, it's moving all the time, so too many molecules bump into each other, they move from one place to other. But if it has to be, cell needs to maintain that concentration gradient, so it has to go against that concentration gradient and develop a difference between intracellular and extracellular, so it needs to spend energy. So active transport is the mechanism that requires use of cell's energy against the electrochemical. So one is chemical gradient and another is electrical gradient. Electrical like charged cells, ions which are charged, okay, molecules which are not charged and ions which are charged. So here one of the famous, and you will hear it again and again in so many cells, so many discussions, is the sodium potassium pump, okay. So here the cell needs to take out sodium and take in potassium, okay. So it needs more sodium outside and more potassium inside, okay, against the concentration gradient. If it leaves it like that, there will be equal sodium and potassium outside and inside, okay. But it needs to establish a concentration gradient. Why does it need to establish? For the action potential for future, when we are studying, okay, here's a thought inside the brain and the brain sends a signal. That signals come through nerve, okay, through an action potential, an electrical current going on along the nerve to, for example, my hand or my leg or cardiac muscles or anywhere, okay. So in order for that action potential to travel, we need ions in a specific concentration outside and inside, okay. It cannot be neutral. It has to maintain a sodium potassium difference. So that difference is created through sodium potassium pump, okay. This is an example of active transport. Active transport is the transport which is using energy. So here it is, binding of cytoplasmic sodium potassium pump, and it leads to throws sodium outside, potassium inside, and ATP goes into ADP and the phosphate, and then the energy factories, the mitochondria, they take adenosine diphosphate again and convert it into ATP, and then it goes back to sodium potassium pump, and that stuff goes on. So active transport with the expense of energy against the electrochemical gradient. You understand this, right? Okay, great. So yeah, so then there's an sodium potassium ATPase, an enzyme an active transport pump that moves 3 sodium out and potassium inside. So there's an enzyme that breaks ATP into ADP and phosphate, that using that energy, that's called the sodium potassium ATPase, okay. So it throws sodium outside, potassium inside. So inside the cell there is high potassium here, high potassium and low sodium, and outside the cell there is high sodium and low potassium. Similarly, there is a chloride ion thing also, so to maintain the negative charge, and that we're gonna study in detail in lecture on action potential. Okay. Now we have talked about diffusion, which is passive transport, and we have talked about active transport, which is mediated by sodium potassium pump. Now in addition to that, we have some types of movements which are neither diffusion and nor active transport of the simple sort, okay. It is active transport, but it is not the simple one. It is called vesicular transport, okay. Now vesicular transport is different because there may be some molecules which are bigger in size, or some organisms like bacteria or something which either does not have receptors or it does not have any way possible of going inside the cell, okay. So it's called vesicular transport. Now in order to understand vesicular transport, just imagine that there's a balloon, because cell is 3-dimensional, it's in the form of balloon, and you poke your finger inside the cell, okay. So inside the balloon, so there's a dent inside, okay. Now imagine that when you poke your finger inside, that vesicle, that pit inside here, for example this one, that pit here, there's a dent in the cell, that pit receives some of the molecules inside, okay, and then it detaches from the cell membrane. Cell membrane remains intact, but that bit becomes a vesicle inside. It is still a cell inside the cell, okay. It's a plasma membrane bound organelle or a small bubble inside the cell, okay. So it is detached from cell membrane, and it has those contents here, this molecule, for example, or bacteria or organelles or things which cannot go through inside the cell, either through diffusion or any sodium potassium pump or any other pump, because of their size or because of their charge or because of any reason, okay. So they need to be escorted, okay. They have to be, you know, they have some security reasons, you know, so they cannot go inside by themselves. So there has to be some security for them. So the security comes from that vesicle in the cell membrane that goes around them and makes it a small bubble inside the cell. Now that small bubble inside the cell will go to a specific place, or when the time comes, it will open up and release those chemicals inside, okay. Release. This is also an active transport process, and it has its own purposes. Now, vesicular transport again has its own different types. For example, if these molecules are relatively small, they are called pinocytoses. If they are big, a bacteria or another particle which is huge, it's called phagocytosis. Phagocytosis means eating something, right? Eating. So phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is a very interesting phenomena. There's one phenomena called autophagy. Autophagy, where the body is eating its own cells. Okay. You ever heard about this word autophagy? Autophagy. Phagocytosis means eating something. Okay. Sorry. Absorbing something, yeah. And autophagy means eating oneself, okay. So body has certain mechanisms where it eats the cancer cells or the damaged cells or something like that. Sorry? Attacking? No, not attacking, but just eating itself, okay. So autophagy means body has its own mechanisms of eating its own cells, okay. So it's a defense mechanism, and it's coming to my mind because there was a very good research paper about autophagy in which they have described that caffeine actually helps kill the cancer cells through autophagy. Okay, autophagy is a very interesting phenomenon. Maybe in future you hear about a Nobel Prize on autophagy, because autophagy is very important for cancer, defense against cancer. But anyways, so endocytosis is one of the vesicular transport mechanisms. Okay. Now endocytosis means endo, okay, taking from outside to inside, vesicular transport, okay, in the form of a vesicle. So things come in contact, and then there's a vesicle formation goes inside, and then it releases the contents into the cell, okay, cytoplasm, and then maybe it takes other things outside or whatever. So if it's a very big kind of organism or molecule, it has to be it has a different word which is called phagocytosis. And then there's another type of endocytosis, another type of vesicular transport. Now endocytosis is a form of vesicular transport, and another form of vesicular transport is receptor mediated endocytosis. Here the cells, they are coming, all sorts of cells are coming here, okay. For example, there's a vesicle formation, and these big molecules, they cannot go inside, so they form a vesicle. But here there are specific molecules which have target proteins on the cell, okay, like the receptor proteins, the target proteins. So these target proteins, they come on the cell, they, for example, knock at the door, they show their ID card, and the cell makes a vesicle to let them come inside, okay. So they have their own receptor molecules or their own target molecules on the cell surface. So this is called a receptor mediated endocytosis. Endocytosis means something which is coming inside. a specific form of endocytosis where cells use receptor proteins on the surface to bind and internalize specific molecules. Okay, internalize specific molecules. Now, another type of vesicular transport is the exocytosis. Now, exo means exiting, going outside, like people are going outside. So, like, hopefully they don't listen to me. So this is exocytosis. Now, someone will walk inside, that would be endocytosis. But it's more of a diffusion type, you know, there's no energy. The energy would be, so it's like, energy would be like, this is a class of grade 9 or 10, you know, when you were in grade 9, remember that when you were in, you know, early teenagers, and I'm a teacher in a school, and I see people here talking to each other, or they are talking to each other, and I spend energy, you know, ATP, and I use that energy and I say exocytosis, and those students go outside using that energy. So that would be exocytosis. This open door policy, university students, grown-up people, who can understand if the lecture is important or not, or if a phone call is more important or not, or if they say it's boring, I don't need to listen, I already studied the slides, so I can go out and have a coffee or something like that. Okay, so you can go outside, you can come inside, you keep the door open. That's more of diffusion. Okay, it's not exocytosis or endocytosis. Endocytosis is like I bring you all inside and I say, sit here and you cannot move. Okay, some of the professors, they do that. Do they do it here? No? Okay. Because it's a university, okay? Nobody, you guys are university students. You guys are mature enough to understand the implications of not attending a lecture, okay? So you can prioritize. You are responsible citizens. Are you responsible citizens? Yes? Yeah, most of the time. Okay, so you can diffuse outside or diffuse inside, but as I said, this one, vesicular transport, is active transport. It needs energy for bringing things inside and throwing things outside. So taking things outside is called exocytosis, which is a cellular process where cells expel large molecules, waste products, or secretions by merging a vesicle with the cell membrane. Now, it's a little different from the first one, because here you can see this is extracellular fluid. Please look at this diagram. Extracellular fluid, intracellular fluid, cytoplasm. Okay, so here is the membrane-bound vesicle. Okay, now cell has got a molecule. Cell has got a molecule that they want to transport outside, but the molecule is too big in size, so it cannot go out through channels or proteins or diffusion or something like that. So they make a secretory vesicle. The cell will secrete something outside. Okay, cell will send something out. Secretory vesicle, it's like a cell membrane around. Okay, maybe the same one here. This vesicle that come in, okay, and delivers something here, and on its way out it takes exocytosis of vesicular content. Okay, or maybe we can make a new one here, secretory vesicle. Secretory vesicle is a bubble that forms inside. Then it has proteins on it that go and talk to the proteins on the cell membrane, and then it fuses and makes a channel outside, and through that channel this vesicle fuses with the cell membrane, and the contents, they are delivered outside of the cell. Okay, so that's how things are secreted. If a cell is making a hormone, for example insulin or something like that, okay, it's a big molecule, it cannot be transported, diffused, or through a channel protein, so it needs to be secreted outside with the expense of energy. So this is called process of exocytosis, and this is an electron micrograph of the secretory vesicle. So its mechanism is vesicular formation, vesicle movement, vesicle fusion with the cell, and releasing contents are expelled into extracellular space. What are the functions of exocytosis? Why we need it? The clear cellular waste, secretion of substances, it releases hormones, enzymes, neurotransmitters, and membrane recycling. Okay, membrane recycling, because membrane is in a living organism, it's a dynamic thing, it keep on recycling, so it goes in and goes out, and it keeps on maintaining its own self. Okay, so that's all for this lecture. I hope you understand the mechanism of cellular transport. If you have any questions, you can ask now, you can send me emails, you can come to my office. Thank you so much for your patient listening. See you next time.
For exams, should we rely on slides or the book?
Slides and the books.
Because you said acid-base balance is not really mentioned in the first chapters of the book.
Yeah,
So it's in the...
yeah, actually it's in the kidneys chapter. It's an example of homeostasis that we have to explain at this time, just to make you understand the homeostasis, but it's actually a topic from the kidneys chapter, okay? Renal system. Just browse the book and you will find it.
What is the meaning of this word?
Intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid, ICF and ECF.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Like outside the cell membrane, it's called extracellular something, which is inside the cell, it's intracellular.
Intracellular.
Yeah, so it's outside and inside is different because of some ions are different, some chemicals are different, some products are different. So the cell membrane maintains a difference between ICF and ACF.
Okay, thank you so much.
Doctor, I have. Can you repeat for me? Let's just say a process and let's just say not this lecture, the past lecture. This slide. I haven't quite understood it.